Family, let me tell you something. Your mind is the battlefield the enemy loves to play in, because if he can get your emotions stirred up, if he can make you react instead of respond, then he already has the upper hand. But I came to tell you tonight that you don't have to be tossed around by every wave of how you feel. Feelings are real, yes, but they are not always truth. And if you're going to step into the fullness of who God has called you to be, you've got to train your mind to stand firm when your emotions want to run wild. Somebody say, I'm stronger than my feelings. Oh, your feelings are valid, but they don't always tell you the truth. That is one of the hardest lessons we ever have to learn, because emotions feel so real in the moment. When anger rises up in your chest, it feels like truth. When heartbreak weighs down your spirit, it feels like truth. When fear shakes your body and makes you hesitate to step forward, it feels like truth. But feelings are not always reliable narrators of our lives. They can exaggerate, they can deceive, they can make temporary pain look like a permanent condition. That's why you have to train yourself to look beyond how you feel and search for the truth that's steady and unchanging, the truth that isn't shaken by your moods, your circumstances, or the storms around you. Think about a time when you were so convinced that something was the end of you. Maybe it was the end of a relationship. Maybe it was the loss of a job. Maybe it was a disappointment that crushed you so deeply you couldn't even imagine getting out of bed the next day. In that moment, your feelings told you it was over. Your feelings told you there was no way forward. Your feelings told you that you were not enough, that you had failed, that your story was finished. But look at you now. You're still standing. You're still breathing. You're still fighting for the life God designed for you. Your feelings lied to you, but the truth carried you through. That's why you can't build your identity, your future, or your faith on what you feel in the moment. You've got to root yourself in something stronger. Emotions come and go like waves. One day you're high, the next day you're low. One moment you're confident, the next moment you're doubting everything about yourself. If you let your emotions dictate your decisions, you'll spend your whole life swinging back and forth without ever finding stability. That's why people quit things they were called to do. That's why people walk away from blessings. That's why people sabotage relationships they prayed for, because they followed their feelings instead of the truth. Training your mind means learning how to pause and ask, is this real, or is this just how I feel? Because when you learn to separate the two, you'll stop reacting and start responding with wisdom. Feelings are powerful, but they are not permanent. You may feel fear today, but courage is still available to you. You may feel unworthy right now, but your worth was never tied to your emotions. You may feel like quitting, but that doesn't mean your breakthrough isn't waiting just beyond this test. The problem is that so many of us let temporary emotions make permanent decisions. We let sadness convince us to isolate when we really need community. We let fear convince us to stay small when we're meant to step out in faith. We let anger convince us to burn bridges we were meant to build on. That's why your mind has to rise above your emotions. Your mind has to be trained to recognize that just because it feels true doesn't mean it is true. God never said you wouldn't feel weak. He never said you wouldn't feel tired. He never said you wouldn't feel afraid. But he did promise that his strength would be made perfect in your weakness. And that means you don't have to let weakness define you. Feelings might show up, but they don't have to stay in control. When you feel overwhelmed, the truth is that God is still in control. When you feel abandoned, the truth is that he will never leave you nor forsake you. When you feel inadequate, the truth is that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Feelings are loud, but the truth is louder if you train yourself to listen. Some of us were raised to believe that feelings are facts. If we felt unloved, we believed we were unlovable. If we felt invisible, we believed we had no worth. If we felt afraid, we believed danger was around every corner. And so we grew up carrying the weight of emotions that weren't anchored in reality. But now it's time to retrain your mind. You don't have to live under the shadow of false narratives your feelings created. You can choose to rewrite the story by anchoring yourself in truth. Your emotions may say you are weak, but the truth says you are more than a conqueror. Your emotions may say you can't, but the truth says all things are possible through Christ who strengthens you. There's nothing wrong with feelings in themselves. They were designed to help us connect, to help us empathize, to help us experience life fully. But feelings were never meant to be your leader. They are signals, not dictators. They are indicators, not instructors. When you feel pain, it shows you where healing is needed. When you feel joy, it shows you where blessings overflow. When you feel fear, it shows you where courage is required. But none of those feelings get to determine the truth about who you are. They can point to an experience, but they cannot define your identity. That's why you have to train your mind to interpret your feelings instead of being enslaved by them. Training your mind is not about ignoring your emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about putting them in their proper place. It's about saying, yes, I feel this, but I will not be controlled by it. Yes, I feel this, but I will not let it define me. Yes, I feel this, but I will not let it distort the truth. That takes practice. That takes discipline. That takes intentionality. You have to start by paying attention to your inner dialogue. What are you telling yourself when your emotions are running high? Are you reinforcing the lies? Or are you speaking truth back into yourself? You cannot wait for your emotions to align before you walk in obedience. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll miss opportunities. If you wait until you feel strong, you'll never step into your assignment. If you wait until you feel confident, you'll always stay on the sidelines. Your emotions will catch up, but your mind has to lead the way. Your mind has to be anchored in the truth of God's word, the truth of your purpose, the truth of your calling. And when your mind is strong, your emotions will eventually line up with what is real. Discipline your mind, and your emotions will follow. That is one of the most powerful yet challenging principles to embrace, because discipline is not something that comes naturally to us. Discipline requires structure when we'd rather give in to impulses. Discipline requires focus when distractions are pulling at us from every direction. Discipline requires consistency when our emotions are shifting like the weather. But if you can train your mind to remain disciplined even when you don't feel like it, you'll discover that your emotions eventually align with the choices your mind has already made. When you wake up in the morning and don't feel like getting up, discipline tells you that your purpose is greater than your comfort. When you feel the temptation to give in to anger, discipline tells you that self-control is more powerful than outbursts. When you feel fear creeping into your heart, discipline tells you that courage is an act of faith, not the absence of fear. This is why discipline is not about ignoring how you feel, but about leading yourself with principles that remain steady even when your emotions fluctuate. If your mind is trained to operate with discipline, your emotions will eventually learn to follow instead of dictate. Think of an athlete in training. They don't always feel like showing up to the gym, but they go anyway. They don't always feel like sticking to a strict diet, but they know it's necessary. They don't always feel like pushing their body past exhaustion, but they understand that consistency builds strength. Discipline doesn't depend on how you feel. It depends on what you've committed to. In the same way, your mind needs that same level of training. You have to teach yourself to act according to principles instead of moods. And as you do that over time, your emotions will start to catch up with the disciplined choices you've made. Your emotions are followers by design. They respond to what your mind decides to focus on. If your mind dwells on negativity, your emotions will feel heavy. If your mind constantly entertains fear, your emotions will grow anxious. If your mind rehearses failure, your emotions will feel defeated. But when your mind is disciplined to shift toward gratitude, hope, and truth, your emotions rise to meet that energy. That's why scripture says to take every thought captive, because when you control your thoughts, you gain influence over your emotions. It's not about pretending your emotions don't exist, but about recognizing that your emotions will follow the direction of your disciplined thoughts. Discipline is what separates a momentary desire from a lifelong transformation. You may feel like giving up, but discipline says keep going. You may feel like you don't belong, but discipline says you're chosen and appointed. You may feel like the battle is too big, but discipline says that with God, nothing is impossible. The act of disciplining your mind creates patterns that build resilience And resilience is what allows you to stand when everything inside of you feels like crumbling. Discipline doesn't silence your emotions, but it teaches them how to stay in their lane. It teaches them that they are not in charge of the final decision. There will be moments when your emotions scream louder than your discipline. The pain may feel unbearable. The fear may feel paralyzing. The doubt may feel overwhelming. But that's when discipline becomes your anchor. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what is true. Discipline doesn't ask if you're comfortable. It asks if you're committed. Discipline doesn't ask if it's easy. It asks if it's worth it. And in those moments when your emotions are raging, your disciplined mind keeps you from making decisions that sabotage your future. It holds you steady until your emotions calm down enough to follow. A disciplined mind is not something you develop overnight. It's a daily practice, a daily choice. It's choosing to speak life over yourself when you feel defeated. It's choosing to show up for your purpose when you feel inadequate. It's choosing to walk in obedience even when you feel afraid. Every time you choose discipline over emotion, you strengthen your mind, and every time your mind grows stronger, your emotions lose a little more control. Over time, your emotions begin to follow the patterns your mind has created, and what once felt impossible becomes natural. Discipline your mind to focus on what you can control, and your emotions will stop drowning you in what you can't. So much of our emotional turmoil comes from dwelling on things outside our power. We replay conversations we can't change. We worry about outcomes we can't predict. We carry the weight of problems we can't fix. But when your mind is disciplined to focus on the next right step, the next faithful choice, the next act of obedience, your emotions find peace in the present moment. They learn to follow the steadiness of your mind instead of dragging you into chaos. Discipline also means setting boundaries for your thoughts. You cannot entertain every idea that comes into your mind and expect to live in peace. If you let negativity camp out in your mind, your emotions will grow dark. If you let comparison run wild, your emotions will spiral into envy. If you let worry take the wheel, your emotions will sink into despair. But when you discipline your mind to guard its gates, to filter what it allows in, your emotions respond with stability. That's why your discipline isn't just about what you do. It's also about what you refuse to give your attention to. Discipline your mind, and your emotions will follow. When you teach yourself to act based on truth rather than impulse, you are retraining your entire system